Welcome to the Impact Marketing Podcast, episode 37. And this episode is about habits. Habits, such a small word describing such a hugely powerful thing. So we're going to talk about habits, how to build them, and why it matters for entrepreneurs. As always, you can go to impactpodcast.com to get links to the latest episodes and to all the show notes. So anything we reference during the episode, everything we talk about during the episode, I will link to in the show notes. And to get them, if you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever, you can go to impactpodcast.com to find all of those relevant links. And with that, let's get straight into it. I'm Shane Melaugh.
And I'm Paul McCarthy.
And like I said, we're going to talk about habits because, and this is a topic that comes up a lot when you talk to entrepreneurs, because it's, you know, even though a lot of the things we're going to be talking about in this episode aren't directly related to business, you know, we're not going to be talking about business strategy or how to get more traffic or anything like that. But still, all of this is extremely important, and it's one of the cornerstones of what makes a successful entrepreneur. Because it's like at this intersection, right? Habits, it's one of these things that's at the intersection of the person and the business. And in general, I think you see personal development often go hand in hand with entrepreneurship. Because if the person trying to build the business is a total mess, right? If your life is in shambles, then the business is basically doomed to fail. It's probably not going to work. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the things where so many people who are entrepreneurs are also into personal development and, you know, have read various Tim Ferriss books and have read the 7 Power Habits or whatever and all that stuff, right? And so, yeah, so for me personally as well, habits are really, really important. The way I kind of build habits into my life, and it's very important to how I'm able to run the businesses that I do. And I'm guessing for you, Paul, it's a similar story, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've been working on a lot recently. I read quite a few books about this because I realized that if I'm going to make any kind of personal development improvement with regards to being more efficient and being more productive in any given period of time, I need to run on autopilot and just get things done without worrying about this whole motivation thing that keeps coming up. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit later in this podcast. But motivation and habit are very different things.
Yeah. So that's actually a good point. In terms of books, do you have any recommendations there?
Well, the one that really sticks out in my mind is The Power of Habit.
Yeah.
And I'd love to be able to tell you the author, but I can't. My memory sucks. I guess you know.
Duhigg, Charles or Peter Duhigg, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great book. Another one that's actually quite similar. So, you know, if you read the one and you read the other, then you'll see the same kind of concepts applied. Is The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. So that's another one and The Willpower Instinct, I feel, is a bit more practical. It's more like, you know, step 1, do this, step 2, do this. It's almost built up as a self-experiment. But both of these books, these are, I'd say, easily the 2 best books about habits that I've read, about very specifically habits that I've read. And yeah, they're awesome. And another great one to read is Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. And we'll link to all of those below. With that, let's get into it with some examples of habits that we've built that we feel are important to what we do as entrepreneurs. So for me, the first one I wrote down here is actually 3 habits. That's, first of all, that I have a healthy diet, that I exercise regularly, and that I meditate every day. And all of these 3 contribute to having a clearer mind and contribute to my ability to be able to focus. And this is something I've really noticed, especially when I'm traveling a lot. So when I'm on the road for long periods of time, that's when diet, exercise, and sometimes also meditation really start to suffer. Because that's when you don't really have a daily routine anymore. You're in a different place every day. You're eating out all the time. It's not very healthy. And I really notice a massive difference, especially just to my overall mood, right? If my diet isn't very good and I haven't exercised in a while, or I can't go to the gym regularly or something like that, my mood really takes a hit, and just my, let's say my default mood, my neutral mood is just worse, and I'm feeling a bit gloomy in general. Whereas when these things are on point, then my default mood is that I'm, quite content. And that makes a big difference. That makes also a big difference to just my ability to work, right? Because if you're in a gloomy mood, it's much more difficult to get yourself to start working, and it's much more difficult to tackle complicated problems and stuff like that. So those are some of the most important habits I have. So healthy diet, exercise, and meditation really help with focus. And maybe to go into a bit more detail, I also try to make these things as simple as possible for myself. So when it comes to diet, for example, there are, there's like a million different theories about what a healthy diet looks like, and they all contradict each other violently. And I've done a lot of experimentation there, but what I'm currently doing is I try to keep it as simple as possible. And the way that looks for me is that I just aim to eat, about 70 to 80% of what I eat is raw, unprocessed, fresh vegetables and fruit. And then I eat whatever else I want. So the way I do it is like, instead of going into too much detail and trying to count calories and count macros and count all sorts of stuff and keep track of some intricate, complicated system, the way I approach diet is that I basically imagine every morning there's like a big pile of fruit and vegetables. And my theory is, if I eat all of this and then I eat whatever else I want I fit in whatever else I want, that's healthy. Okay. And so this is also something that's quite important to me, because I have done, like I said, I've experimented with diet a lot, and it can take up a lot of your time and of your ability to focus. If you have a more intricate diet plan, I've just found that it takes up a greater part of my attention to make sure I eat the right things, to make sure I buy the right things at the right time and make the right meals at the right moment and so on. And I don't want to be investing that much into my diet. So that's why it's not just about what I eat, it's also about having a really simple system to follow. And that's another point we'll get to. The simpler the systems are that you can set up for yourself, the easier it is to follow a habit. So, all right, do you have some examples of habits that have helped you?
We're fairly similar in this regard. Instead of meditating on a daily basis, I'm starting to do a lot more writing. Mm-hmm. This is one thing that really helps me. If I have a situation where there's a lot going on and I need to come to some kind of logical decision rather than base that on kind of an emotional feeling I'm having at the time, I'll sit down, I won't do any work, and I'll just write out the situation in a very logical fashion. And by the end of that time, actually it's something we spoke about a while ago, because I think you do this in your business, in your life as well, don't you? With personal development stuff. That really helps me focus and concentrate on what I want to be doing on a daily basis. And the exercise thing as well, we both trained together for long periods of time. I have exactly the same feeling about this as you. If I don't train for a long period of time, I feel crap. I feel really bad. And that really helps me to stay on key.
You don't really see a direct connection with exercising, between exercising and running a business. But it really, I feel like, and it's also quite slow, right? It's not like you go to the gym once and suddenly you're totally on fire, or you skip the gym once and everything falls apart. It's much slower, and I think it's tricky, because you can easily be in a situation where you don't even know how big of a difference this can make, but it can really make quite a big difference. To just keep yourself active. And I'm a big believer in that the human body is built to be active, and that's why exercise is such an essential thing and so important to properly functioning. If we're sitting so much, we spend so much time just sitting and being inactive, that is unhealthy, and it makes all the parts of the body work worse. And that's why exercise is one of my top habits that I also recommend for any entrepreneur. On top of that, I think it's also great if you exercise hard. It's great for developing grit. It's great for developing that just that quality where I don't want to go to the gym and do a really hard session, but I'm going to anyway. And that's a good quality to have. Okay, some other habits. Single tasking is a big one for me. So single tasking is just the idea that you only ever do one thing at a time. And you can take this to extremes. The most extreme version of this that I don't always do, but sometimes do, is where you actually track every activity you do. So using a time tracking app like Toggle, before basically you say, so right now I'd start a task, say that says record podcast, and I'd start a timer, and then I'd be doing that until the podcast ends. Then I end the timer, and then maybe I start one that says edit podcast, and I start doing that. And tracking every single thing you do, including, eating food, including going grocery shopping, whatever, is a very interesting exercise in single tasking. Because if you have to, it forces you to make a deliberate choice. Because if the phone rings, I have to ask myself, am I going to stop the current task, which might be writing blog post, and start a new timer that says phone? Start the timer, pick up the phone, have the phone conversation, stop the timer, start the timer, writing blog post again, and continue, right? And it just forces you to make these decisions much more deliberately. Right? Because now it's not just that you go, I'm slightly distracted, I'm going to go over to Reddit and spend 5 minutes of Reddit. You have to make a conscious decision. I'm going to Reddit now instead of doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. So that's something, but that's extreme. This is something that I almost want to say, don't try this at home unless you're, unless you're already accustomed to some level of single tasking. But yeah, any level of single tasking is extremely important to me, where the idea is just you do one thing at a time and nothing else. And then another thing for me that was very important is to fix my sleep habits. So getting enough sleep obviously is very, very important. And I'm not naturally, let's say, a good sleeper. It generally tends to take me a long time to fall asleep. I often just can't sleep for hours. And so I've had to, implement all sorts of habits in my life to have a more or less decent sleep cycle and get enough sleep. And so those are my top habits that I think really help me be a better entrepreneur. And if you removed all of that out of my life, I actually don't know how bad it would be, but it would be pretty bad. It's clear that my life would be a mess if I didn't have any of this going on. All right. Are there any other habits that you want to mention before we move on to the next bit?
I just noticed in the last year or so that I'm a lot more productive if I have a split focus in terms of keeping business separate from life. So I've been working recently on trying to learn Hungarian. And what I do is half an hour each night on an online app. I just run through for 30 minutes, listen to the same YouTube audio track, which is actually a motivational kind of speech that I don't usually get into. But this one really, it's on a logical level rather than a come on, let's do it level, It kind of gets me going. And so I do that every night. And I find that having kind of a focus on a skill as well that isn't completely unrelated to the business, I can just focus on that. And it does refresh my mind quite well. Having this one track focus is great for hustle mode that you're mentioning in your recent video. And we've both been there. But we now come out of that stage. And I certainly feel like in any given hour, I'm more productive now than I have been at any point in my life.
Right.
Even though the total sum of hours and maybe the total volume of work output isn't quite as big as it was with hustle mode, I'm getting the most output per day on an hourly basis because of these habits and this focus that I now have, due to the fact that my whole life isn't just around one thing.
Yeah. Maybe I should clarify that what I mean by single tasking, by the way, is not that you have only one focus, but that you only focus on one thing at a time. And I think that it carries into many things. So, for example, if I'm writing a blog post, then I open my editor and I close down everything else. I never have, I don't have a thing that chirps at me when I get an email and another thing that chirps at me when someone sends me a message and all that stuff. I don't have any notifications. I open my editor, I start writing, and I keep writing until either the post is done or until I come to some kind of an end, and then I choose to focus on the next thing, right? And it goes beyond that as well, because it's also, if you're talking to someone, focus on that single task of listening to that person and talking to that person. Don't get out your phone and check your email. Right? Because that's the kind of thing we tend to do. We tend to get distracted, and we tend to succumb to distraction. And the idea of single tasking is that you fully commit to the thing you're doing now and nothing else.
It's actually really, really hard to do, especially if you've done a couple of years where, you're used to getting messages every day or Skype messages from your team and things like that. To actually just close it all down and keep that focus for any period of time is actually really hard. In fact, it's so hard that I'm not there yet, if I'm honest. Part of the reason is I'm putting out fires everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's definitely where I want to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, that for me as well, the one exception I have is our Slack, right? We communicate with the team on Slack. And for large parts of the day, that's the one thing where I do check, because if someone has a question for me, then I do interrupt my work to answer that question so that they can continue their work. That's like the one sacrifice I make. And but even there, there will be times of the day where I'm like, even that is not going to get in my way. And
to be honest, if we're thinking about this pragmatically, it's probably not even the most efficient way of doing things. I mean, Slack is a chat messaging tool. It has this default sound, which is like a woodpecker. Mm-hmm. And my flat sounds like a flipping bird sanctuary the whole flipping day going off. It'd probably be better if we had an hour or two where we were like, okay, you can ask us any question you want for this period of time, and anything else can wait till the next day.
Yeah, you should probably try that. Yeah. All right, now, but with that, before we get too far off track, let's get back to habits, with specifically how do you actually build and cultivate good habits? Because I think that's the problem that we usually face, right? Everybody has good intentions. We all have good ideas of what we'd like to change in our lives. But the problem isn't that this is the first time you think, oh yeah, if I exercise regularly and eat better and meditate and single task, then my life will be better. Oh, thanks Shane and Paul.
Yeah.
The problem the problem is that how do you actually build these habits and make them habits, right? How do you do them in a way where you don't just do them like 3 times and then you stop doing them again? And so let's get into that. So the first point I have about this is to create mini habits. Okay, make your habits tiny, especially when you start out. And so I think by now you can almost say it's a famous example. It comes from BJ Fogg, who says, if you want to floss regularly, which is something, all dentists tell all of their patients they should floss more, and all of those patients then go ahead not flossing. So here's what you do. This is the BJ Fogg method of flossing, is you floss 1 tooth per day. Okay, that's it. So your goal isn't to, after you've brushed your teeth, oh God, I have to now floss all my teeth, impatient. You say, I'm going to floss 1 tooth, and that's it. And so this is great for 2 reasons. First of all, it takes away the excuse of, oh, it takes so long. No, it takes like 2 seconds, right? And secondly, what might happen is that you start flossing that 1 tooth and you're like, it gives you that feeling of success, like I've done it. And then you're like, well, I'm already here with this flossing silk. I might as well floss some other teeth, right? So you might end up flossing all your teeth after all, but if you set the goal, floss all my teeth every day, you're not going to do it. So it's a way to trick the brain. And then finally, the another advantage of it is, even if you do just that, if you floss just 1 tooth a day, that's still, for most people, that is infinity% more flossing than they currently do. So even though certainly it would be better to floss all your teeth every day, flossing 1 tooth a day is still better than never flossing, right?
Yeah. I think that we should talk very quickly about the difference between a habit and a motivation, because they actually come from 2 separate parts of the brain. And in the book, The Power of Habit, there's an anecdotal example of this where somebody picks up Japanese encephalitis, goes into a coma for a certain period of time, and actually loses their memory. However, they were still able to remember. I mean, I'm completely cutting this very short right now, but they were still able to remember the things that they picked up as habits
Yeah.
rather than things that weren't ingrained as a habit. So it comes from a different part of the brain, and that brain was unaffected by this Japanese encephalitis. So what's key here when you say don't start with too many habits at once is that the starting period is always the hardest part to build a habit. It's like once you get over a certain period of time, it comes a lot easier. And I think in the book, the example was somewhere like 60 days.
Yeah.
That 60 days, you have to commit to that 60 days. Don't give up during that period. So you have to make a habit whereby you're sure you can get through those first 60 days. And then you just know it's going to get easier and easier. That's why this comes into play. This don't make them too big or keep them too small to fail.
And in fact, and this is it's also actually this is quite difficult to follow, because the problem is when you're in that mode, right? Maybe you listen to this podcast and you go, okay, I'm gonna build some good habits. Then at that moment you're motivated and you feel that motivation to change your life. You feel that motivation to make a positive difference in your life, and in that moment, you don't want to make just one tiny habit, right? In that moment, you're like, no, this is when I'm going to turn my life around, right? I'm going to do this and that and the other and this from now on, right? Now it's all going to be different. And if you feel like that, so if you do this and if you want to set habits for yourself and you have this feeling where you say, no, I want to do more, then I invite you to remember all the other times in your life you felt like this. Because you felt like this before. You have felt that surge of motivation before. And you felt before that this time is going to be different. This time I'm really going to do it. And ask yourself, historically, what has your success rate been? And for most people, that success rate is close to zero, right? So you've already proven to yourself many, many times that this does not work. And so even though it's like annoying because you have to hold yourself back and you have to make your habits so small that it's too small to fail at, right? Flossing one tooth is almost impossible to fail at that. So you make your habits so small. Another one, for example, for meditation, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to meditate for 30 minutes every day, here's the tiniest possible habit you can make of that. Take one conscious breath every day, right? And that is so small, it feels ridiculous. In fact, it almost feels insulting that I suggest this, right? Because what do I think you can't do more than that? But that's exactly the point. It has to make it so small that you're annoyed about how small it is. That's the right size. And only do one. So instead of saying, I'm going to start flossing and meditating and exercising, and you say, I'm going to do the one thing, and I'm going to build this one habit slowly, step by step, until that's a fully formed habit. And then I'm going to do the next one. And again, this will be annoying and you will want to do more. If you're feeling motivated, you will want to do more than that. And that's the feeling you should have, right? The feeling you should have when you set out to build new habits is that you actually want to do way more than you're planning here. That's what sets you up for success.
Yeah. And what you just said there about looking back on your personal history and seeing how many times you've failed when you've tried to start something new, that's not something specific to anybody. I think, honestly, the biggest difficulty with any skill and getting any result out of learning a skill is just sticking through the period where it's going to be nasty, which is the first 60 days, and getting through that, just committing to it. And if you even put this into an internet marketing example from an anecdote of myself, I used to build niche sites 6-7 years ago, and I used to just chuck a site up for a month, get bored, chuck a new one up, get bored. I had an epiphany one day. I was like, this time I'm going to build a habit and post this once per day, and I'm just not going to stop. I'm not going to build a new site until this one takes off. And that was the first time I actually had an income producing asset online.
Yeah.
And I think if you take the mindset, most people do not get the result because they do not stick to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the exception. It's going to be difficult. I'm going to be the exception. And also, when you try and build a habit, often, you'll get up to the period where you're just about to start doing what you're trying to do. So in this instance, I just gave, it would be writing an article, and I just feel like I just don't want to do it. for some reason, every now and then it would be, I just really just don't want to write this article. Just get started. Just write the title in that example. And it's funny, you know, even you just sit down for a few minutes, you write the title, your mind shifts.
Yeah.
It's like, just put on your running shoes and see if that helps you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's it. And I should also say, you know, I was talking about this, and like I said, I've built a lot of habits that make my life a lot better. But I have been in that exact situation that I described countless times. I honestly can't tell you how often I've had that surge of motivation, and I've said to myself that I'm going to turn it around and all that, and I utterly failed at it. So it's the most human. You know, if you were listening to that thinking, oh my God, that describes exactly how I am, that's because it's the most human thing ever. Like this, we all do this. And that's why in this episode, we're talking about ways to kind of hack your brain, right? And trick your brain out of these patterns that it usually follows.
Yeah. And if you can anticipate, if you know over the next 60 days, you're going to feel like this, you can anticipate it, and you can basically be ready for it. And you just battle through.
All right. So next, another method that works really well for me, but that doesn't work for everyone, is what I think is most commonly called the Seinfeld method, where the idea is you visually track every day that you fulfill your habit, right? So, and that could be, you know, it could be on a whiteboard where you have your habit, floss one tooth every day, and you have a bunch of empty boxes, and you make a check mark into every box every day for every day that you fulfill it. And what happens is that you start building this streak of unbroken days where you've done that, and you don't want to break that. And the longer the streak gets, the more you want to keep it going, because it feels, you know, if you've done it twice and then you stop, who cares? But if you've done it 30 days in a row, then you really don't want to break that 30-day streak, and you have this visual representation there. It feels really bad to break a 30-day streak and then start from zero again. And that's something that works quite well for me. And I've done that for a long, long time. So what I used to do is I used to print out just an Excel table that I made, basically an empty table, right? With a cell on the left where I entered, where I just wrote by hand whatever the habit was. So let's say meditation. And then just a whole row of empty boxes next to it. And for every day that I did it, I'd check the box. And yeah, that's how you keep track of it. Now, there's also tons of apps to do this. So the one I'm using right now is called Habitbull. It's pretty good. I think it might be Android only. There's also tons of multi-platform ones and iPhone ones. So some of them that I know are Joe's Goals, Strides, Habit List, Habit RPG, 42 Goals, and so on. And I'm going to link to some of these below, but these are not even endorsements. I haven't even tried half of these myself, but there are tons and tons of apps that do the exact same thing. It's like you enter a habit, and every day where you fulfill the habit, you tap a thing and it gives you a check mark, and it tells you how long your success streak is, and it reminds you, if you're about to, if the day is coming to an end and you haven't checked the habit yet, it gives you a reminder. That kind of thing works really well for me. My brain totally latches onto that, and I totally don't want to break my success streaks. It's like totally silly, right? But my brain is addicted to that, so I make use of it.
Yeah, that's cool. And there's also even simpler versions of this whereby the example I give would be saving money as a habit. There's a great site online, Money Saving Expert. You can sign up as a forum participant, and you can chuck yourself into these group tasks. For instance, I'm going to save £12,000 in 1 year, and everyone gives their updates each month. And so you're publicly announcing that you're going to stick to something, and you have a community of people who are all trying to do the same thing. And it definitely gives you that boost to stick with it.
Yeah, good point. And then another step up from that is the kind of thing like Stick. That's STICKK, I think, where you can basically set up a punishment for yourself if you don't fulfill your goal. So the way I think Stick works is that you set your goal, and you set one or several kind of accountability partners, so people who will be monitoring your progress, and then you put some money in an escrow. So let's say you put $200 in an escrow, and if if your accountability partners report that you failed to stick to your habit, that money will be donated to a charity that you hate. All right. So, and that's another way that for me, that this has never appealed to me. But I think that's also, for different people, different methods will work. And that's one worth trying because it taps into loss aversion. Sometimes, maybe, so I don't know, you want to lose weight and that's like an aspirational goal, right? You want to be slimmer and healthier and whatnot. That's like this aspirational goal. You have a positive image in your head of what your life will be like if you exercise more and eat better. But sometimes that just doesn't give you enough pull towards that goal. But the idea of losing $200 and having it donated to a charity that you hate, that's kind of loss. It puts a real fire under your ass and keeps you going, right? and so I think that's just another thing to be aware of, right? There's always on the one hand, the aspiration and the pull towards the positive, but on the other hand, wanting to avoid the negative. And I think being in a community and having like a public commitment also does a bit of both, right? Because on the one hand, it gives you momentum because you see other people doing the same thing. You have the support. On the other hand, there's also, you don't want to be the one guy who's like, oh, yeah, I failed at this. I totally quit when all of you are still going. And that gives you that loss aversion boost as well.
Yeah, that's very true. I think you and I were training once, and I gave a loss aversion example because you weren't lifting the weights or something like that, and it really lit a fire at your ass. But I can't remember what it is. I think I accused you of being, normal people wouldn't lift this.
Yeah, something like that.
And all of a sudden the weight hit the ceiling.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. All right. Now, next, this is probably one of the most powerful ones, is to change the environment to facilitate your habit.
This is another BJ Fogg.
And this is another, BJ Fogg is like, I think, the best known proponent of this. This is super, super important, right? So, and to give you an example, this is from ages ago when I was doing market research for my productivity product, which is no longer available. But I did that at one point, and as part of my marketing, part of my market research, I offered free coaching to people. So I was like, hey, if you have a problem with procrastination or with being productive, get on a Skype call with me. I'll give you free coaching on this. And I remember very clearly in one of the calls, I was talking to this potential client, let's say, and she was telling me that one of her problems was distraction and how she was watching TV too much. That was like her go-to distraction thing, is turn on the TV. And I told her, look, there's a really simple solution to this. Throw your TV out. Like, don't tell yourself, I'm going to watch TV a little less. Don't tell yourself, I'm not going to watch TV, but it's sitting there in your living room every time you walk by. No, take it and throw it out. Or, take it and give it to someone who wants a TV. But the point is, get it out of your environment. That is the simplest fix. And it's very radical. But it works extremely well. And this is another example. I had the same thing with video games at one point, okay? So I was an avid gamer when I was younger. And at one point, very, very long time ago, I decided that I was spending too much time in these, with this virtual entertainment. And I decided that this wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my life. And so what I did is I gathered every single game I had, and I had like an Xbox or something at the time. I got that, every game I had for it, and put it all on eBay for sale. And I deleted every single game I had on my computer. And that was the end of it. That was the end of my distraction via video games. And the thing is, this is something that you have a huge resistance against, but it is, once you do it, is the easiest fix. Because it's like, and it's so funny how people resist doing this, but it's like, imagine that you quit smoking, but you constantly have an unlit cigarette in your mouth. Like, clearly that's not going to be a good idea, right? Clearly you're setting yourself up for failure. And it's the exact same thing with a lot of other stuff, especially, things that you want to, if you want to stop something, like get that thing 100% out of your environment. That's the easiest way to stop. But the same thing goes in other ways, right? So that's, one thing is like removing something from your environment in order to facilitate stopping. Another thing is just removing friction. And this can be don't underestimate how important this is. So let me give you an example that shows how seemingly trivial this can be. So a very simple habit is to hydrate enough, to drink enough water, right? Now, one way you can do that is you can kind of try to remind yourself, oh yes, I should drink more water. Another way you can do that is you can make a habit of always having a small water bottle on your table, and you keep drinking from that, like, or, you know, on your desk where you work or wherever you spend most of your time. And you just keep drinking from that. Whenever it's empty, you get up and you refill it, and you don't continue working until it's refilled again. And what does this do? So you're constantly in the presence of this water bottle, right? So you don't have to remind yourself. You don't have to just out of the blue somehow remember that you're supposed to drink more. It's right there, right? It's right there. And so you keep sipping on it. And as soon as it's empty, well, you go, that's a very simple habit to build. As soon as the bottle is empty, you go and you refill it. And this makes a big, big difference, right? This makes a huge difference. Plus, another reason why this is a good thing to do is it actually adds, without you even thinking about it, it adds another positive habit to your day if you're a desk worker. Because you'll be periodically getting up and refilling a bottle, and you'll be periodically getting up and going to the toilet to empty your bladder. And that's good for you. And if I hadn't told you that right now and you did the water bottle habit, you wouldn't even realize that you're doing that. You wouldn't even realize that you're giving yourself a small, like, health benefit by adding a little bit more activity and, you know, interrupting your seated time more often simply because you have a water bottle on your desk. So it's so trivial, but it can make such a big difference. And it makes the difference between, you know, struggling to try and build a habit and the habit practically happening by itself.
Yeah, this is really powerful. And when we build our products, before we even write a line of code, our team writes anything, Shane and I go through the entire product. We have it all mapped out and we run through the product. And I remember with Thrive Leads, one of the things we wanted to get our customers to do is to test more. Mm-hmm. And we went over this process time and time again to make sure we removed any unnecessary clicks to get from having one form to multiple forms in a split test. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like you clone, you edit, and you're done. You start the test. And it was a very deliberate decision, because if you have to take a script, copy it, put that on a landing page, and then take another script and put it on another landing page, and then find two different names and create some other configs that you just don't want to do, you're just not going to test as much. And that's one of the reasons why I had so much feedback on this, by the way. Loads of people have said, split testing now is so easy that I do it. Yeah. Whereas before they didn't, because they knew they should, but it was just hassle. Exactly. Too much hassle.
And this is, again, this is actually a great example. I'm glad you brought this up, because it shows you how trivial this can be, how small the friction can be, that it can literally be the difference between a few clicks. And this is like, you know, objectively, you look at that and say, okay, you have, you know, let's say one system where the total number of actions to set up a split test is 9 or 10 actions, and it takes, let's say, 70 to 90 seconds to do that. And scenario B, it's 3 to 5 actions, and it takes 20 to 30 seconds to do that. You'd think that, come on, that difference is virtually non-existent. Who doesn't have a minute to set up a split test? Well, it turns out most people don't have a minute to set up a split test, right? Even the tiniest bit of friction can make such a big difference. And and so I think that's something that's worth paying very, very close attention to.
The reason why, even though it takes only a minute, most people don't want to do it, is because it's not a logical decision at that point in time. It's emotional. And when you chuck your TV out, if you decide, okay, listen, I'm making a decision now in a completely emotion-free state. You're like, what do I want to do? I'm going to chuck my TV out because I don't want to watch TV anymore. You're not making a decision at the point where you've just made dinner at the end of a hard day's work and you're just about to sit down on the sofa. That's emotional kind of, I feel like watching TV, but you've made it in a logical sense. And it's the same with the split testing. You have to make the decision at the right point in time. And one of the ways to do that is to just decide in advance what it's going to be and change your environment to reflect it.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a really good point, which also goes back to what I was talking about. When you're feeling really motivated, you feel like you can take on the world, and you feel like, I'm not going to listen to this mini habits, small baby step type thing. I'm just going to like turn it around right now, because that's how you feel right now. And then, tomorrow life is going to crap all over your plans, and
Right.
you won't feel like that anymore. And that's why it's really important to have these systems in place by then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess an extreme version of this is going to these self-help kind of on-location events whereby you're all clapping and dancing on the doing headstands or whatever people do at these things, and you're ecstatic at that point in time, and then they record a testimonial at that point, and everyone's saying things like, "Yeah, I'm absolutely certain I'm going to have $1 million business in the next 12 months because of this." Okay, and then 2 weeks later, they're there at their desk. They've been working 9 hours, and all of a sudden that emotion isn't quite there anymore, and the motivation is gone. That's why habit is so important.
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing I wanted to add here is, in the power of habit, they talk about triggers and how to create a successful habit, it needs to have often some kind of trigger. So it's not just, okay, each day I'm going to do task A, but once I've done this, I'm going to. And that trigger, so for instance, maybe if you want to go running, as soon as I wake up, I'm going to have a glass of water, then I'm going to go running. There's a trigger there. It's building that kind of pattern.
Yeah, yeah. It also it also helps in the problem of, if you just say, well, I want to go running every day, but there's no specific trigger, then you have this thing where you get up and say, well, I don't feel like it right now, so I'm going to do this thing first. Then stuff gets in the way. And, before you know it, it's late at night and you're going to bed and you're like, oh, I didn't go running today. And a trigger also helps make sure that that doesn't happen, right? You just have, oh, this happens, it's noon, that's when I go running. Or I've gotten up, I've had my glass of water, that's when I go running. And make sure that you can't just put it off indefinitely until the day's over. Another thing about triggers is that it also works the other way around, like for habits that you might want to break. So let's say you frequently find yourself watching YouTube videos or browsing Reddit instead of working, or like the example before, you're watching TV instead of doing something more useful with your life. That also will usually have a trigger. There's a moment that triggers you into that pattern, which is get up, go to the couch, turn on the TV. And so one of the simplest things you can do to start working on that is just observe the trigger, like just pay attention to it and just acknowledge it. So, even if something triggers you, let's say, someone sends you, a coworker sends you a message, that puts you under stress, like, oh, where's the report, blah, 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 something like that. And next thing you know, you're walking to the fridge and grabbing something to eat. Because there was a message that caused a stress response, and that triggered a pattern where you go and get something to eat, right? And the first thing to do is just to notice that. It's not even to say, oh, no, I'm going to stop doing this now. I'm not going to eat to calm down my stress. It's just to say, oh, I guess I'm eating this donut because I got this message and because that message caused stress. And the more you do that, the more you just become aware, this is the trigger, this is how I react, the easier it will be to find a solution to that, right, and set up a system. But it's very, very valuable. And this is, this is like meditation speak, right? It's very, very valuable to be able to just observe what's happening without judging it. Just observe what's happening. And to give you an example, I have, to me, creative work is some of the hardest work to do. So stuff like copywriting or putting together a sales presentation or something like that. And I will get to this, the getting stuck in the creative process is something that is a trigger for me, right? So, I start writing and I have a thought, but I get stuck and I don't know, like, how do I put this into words, or how do I create a slide that explains this, or how do I create a good script for this video? Like, I get stuck in that process. And that's something that triggers me and it used to trigger me to seek distraction or to stop the work. And I've just turned that into something else. So what I do now is I get up and I start pacing. And so you see me do this all the time if I'm doing creative work. So I'm writing and getting up and I start pacing around. and then I sit down again and I write some more. So I simply took that trigger and turned it into, I just created a different response to it, where my response now is I get up, I pace, and I think. And I think it through in my head until I either come up with a solution and keep going, or I just decide I'm just going to skip this bit and work on the next bit, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think for me, it's also a creative issue as well. I remember doing the documentation for Thrive Leads, and there was something I just couldn't quite get my head around. I think it was the lead group stuff and how we're going to set that up. Damn, that threw me off. That put a stop in my tracks for a couple of days at least, while I was trying to get my head around this. It really can be quite difficult when you're doing creative stuff.
Okay, so we've done a lot of talking about what we know about building good habits, and I think it's also worth noting that the problems we're facing in the business now are all kind of problems of increasing scale. And I also find that the same kind of stuff you can apply to your own life to build habits and systems also carries over quite a lot into how you build systems for your business, and how you organize teamwork and so on, because in many ways you can actually look at that as building habits for your business. And so I find that this is also one of the ways in which this actually carries over quite directly into business, especially into business at, if you're working with a team of people. If you have a good skill of developing and cultivating your own habits, you can carry quite a lot of that over into essentially, just think of it as building habits for your business. How can you build healthy habits for your business? And you can apply a lot of the same strategies there as well. Okay, so there's a lot in this episode. I will add notes about all this below. I'll link to all the stuff that we mentioned. I think we really managed to pack a lot about positive habits into this episode, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about it. So if you have any questions about this, leave a comment below this post. And if you're listening to this elsewhere, if you're not on the I'm Impact blog, you can go to impactpodcast.com and find a link to this episode with all the show notes. Now, what I would love to know from you as well in a comment is tell us your most valuable habits that carry over into your entrepreneurial skills. I would love to know, what are your daily routines? What are some habits that you set up that really made a difference there? All right, so thank you very much for tuning in. This has been the Impact Marketing Podcast. You can get more at impactpodcast.com, and I'll catch you in the next episode.